What's happening, rugby fans? Welcome to Rugga United, the show where you and I get to talk about the biggest rugby stories that you might have seen on your timeline this past week. Of course, the Springboks beat Wales at Twickenham. The Blitzboks finally qualified for the Olympic Games, and the Bulls unfortunately beaten by the Glasgow Warriors at the Loftus Stadium. So there's so much for us to talk about. My name is Aaron Masamola, and as always, I'm not alone. I'm joined by one of the best rugby journalists in this country. His name is Khotso Sello. Khotso, my brother, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us yet again. I see you're always smiling quite broadly. I don't know if it's about the Springboks, if it's about the Blitzboks, or maybe it's about the Proteas who have now just made it into the final of the T20 Cricket World Cup. Which one is it?
Yeah, no, hats off to the Proteas. I think a job well done. A lot of people thought Afghanistan was going to be a banana skin in the tournament. I mean, we'd had 7 out of 7 coming into this game. They've made it 8 out of 8, and hopefully they'll make it 9 out of 9 and bring the trophy home.
You see, when you say hopefully, and you're talking about the Proteas, we know the story about the Proteas, but I'm hopeful that this could possibly be their first T20 Cricket World Cup trophy that they will be bringing back home. But let's focus a little bit on the rugby.
Yeah.
We saw the Springboks at Twickenham doing what they do best, completely dismantling Wales.
Yeah.
Your analysis of the game, and were you expecting the Springboks to be that dominant? I was expecting Wales to be a little bit more stronger in terms of their defense, but unfortunately that was not the case.
Yeah, man, unfortunately, I think the golden generation of Wales has come and gone. I think Warren Gatland is at a point where now he's literally rebuilding that team. We saw in the Six Nations, he's got a whole lot of youngsters that were promoted from the under-20, under-21 setups. The Welsh teams are not doing particularly well in provincial rugby as well. So there's an entire thing that's going into there. There's money issues. We remember there was a period when the Welsh players themselves were striking at some point. So, things are a little bit uncomfortable in that area. Warren Gatland was there and then he left. Went to go coach the Chiefs in New Zealand. The Chiefs didn't do particularly well, but luckily he had a home. The Welsh called him back. I mean, the Chiefs now played in the Super Rugby final the past weekend against the Auckland Blues. So I don't know if he was a bit of the problem in that camp. But, he's had his stint with the Welsh rugby. I think they understand his way of doing things. He's very old school. He likes the traditional rugby. And I think Wales, if they are a little bit patient with him, things can go. I thought the Springboks might give Wales 50 plus, in all honesty. But we also need to understand that it's the first match of the Springboks after the Rugby World Cup. There's a bit of rust there. There were a whole lot of new faces. You must also remember it takes time to build chemistry. It's a 4-year project now going into the next Rugby World Cup. There's a completely new coaching staff. And so, I think Rassie and his coaching staff can tick a few boxes, in terms of the players coming out unscathed, Malcolm Marx finishing an entire half.
That was good to see.
That was good to see some of the young players, absorbing the pressure, understanding the Springbok system, being in that match day, understanding how things happen during halftime and all sorts of things. So I think there's a lot to be happy about, but there's also a lot of work-ons that need to happen. But nonetheless, 30 plus points in your first season, in your first game of the season, not too bad.
Not too bad. You spoke about the project building up to the 2027 Rugby World Cup, and I would believe that's the main focus for Rassie Erasmus. Yeah. We saw 4 debutants coming into the squad as well.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you which debutant actually stood out for you the most, because we had Jordan Hendricks starting in the number 10 jersey. We had Edwil van der Merwe, who was man of the match, who had a phenomenal game. And we also had Dixon on the bench, and then one of your favorite players actually, Sasha Feinberg Gomezulu, actually taking that massive 52-meter kick. Yeah. Which debutant stood out for you?
I think for me, it probably will be Sasha Feinberg Ngomezulu. just because he just looked like somebody who belongs at test level. He came on, if you remember when he started his URC campaign, I mean, came on and became man of the match. Comes on, he slots a 50-meter plus kick. You know, he just looks tailor-made for this, and he's, you know, ice in his veins. He reminds me of a young Andre Pollard, you know, who...
For a second there, I thought he had elements of like a Frans Steyn in him, because,
He does.
I mean, at international level,
Yeah.
it takes something special to take a kick of that magnitude.
Yeah, he's totally cool, but also if we look back into his history, he's been part of that EPD system that Rassie and them have implemented, where they track players who are potential Springboks. So from under 18, from your schoolboy days, you get into the rugby academy, and you at that high performance center in Stellenbosch, and you keep getting tracked, and sometimes you are absorbed into the training system. You see how the guys do things. You are in the mix, in and around the changing room with the guys. You understand how they prep. You understand how they speak. You understand what happens pre-match in the build-up to the match.
You're exposed to the culture.
On the Thursday when they take the photo and all of that, and the running out, 30, 40,000 people in the crowd, you know. So once you have that kind of background versus a Jordan Hendrickse who's never had that, you know, you can be as talented as you can, but you cannot coach experience.
100%.
And you could tell that in moments, Jordan Hendrickse, you know, would make a few mistakes and feel a bit of the pressure, but it takes nothing away from his talent. So for me, I think Sasha just showed that the system that Rassie and them are implementing is a great system, and we're seeing that there's guys in his team that he's picked that are on the standby list, and the standby list means exactly that, you know, being part of the setup, understanding how things are done, the training, the work-ons, the little things, the little stats that we don't look at. You know, if you need to improve your tackling, your turnaround time from tackling and getting up off the floor, and all of those little technical things that might improve your game greatly. And I think you could tell from there. But also, I was also impressed by Aphelele Fassi.
Oh, he was absolutely amazing under the high ball.
He was
and also
awesome.
speaks to the work that Coach Sticks is doing with the team as well.
100%. He was amazing under the high ball, and he's got the height, you know. And I think some of his decision making let him down, you know, making, you know, unforced errors and forcing a pass here and there, but he will get better with experience. I think we missed Avelile Roux, who becomes a second option of attack. Where he gets the backline going. I think those are some of the fine skills that perhaps a Tony Brown and Mzwanile Stick will start adding to Aphelele Fassi's artillery and arsenal, to make sure that he's a bit sharper when it comes to attack and putting other players into space. But all in all, I think Edwil van der Merwe also deserved his man of the match performance. I think he's one of those players who puts his heart on the sleeve, and it's quite interesting. It's like we churning out wingers like a Coke factory, you know, like they just keep coming. You know, and I just think, you know, it's going to be quite interesting in terms of who we select come, you know, next week when the Springboks take on Ireland at Loftus Versfeld.
Definitely. The one thing that I want to shine a spotlight on, and it's something that many people might not know, is the fact that the man of the match, Edwil van der Merwe, is actually 28 years old. You know? And at first, when I saw it, I'm like, okay, that's a little bit interesting. But then I was also reminded of the story of Dion Fourie, you know, who made his debut also quite late in terms of his traditional like rugby career, because one would say that's way too late. In terms of seeing what Edwil could do on the pitch at Twickenham, would you say that it's never too late for any rugby player? Because technically, it's all about performance. It's not about age anymore.
Yeah, it's surely about performance, and I think Edwil has gone through all the ranks of South African rugby. I remember him still playing varsity rugby for Marties in Stellenbosch, and he was such an unbelievable player there. I thought he was going to be snapped up by perhaps Western Province, and I think the Lions got interested in him and gave him a contract, and he's never failed to impress. But unfortunately for him is that South Africa has just a conveyor belt of talent when it comes to the wing position. He's had to bide his time, and eventually his time came with a few injuries here and there and some players being rested, and he's taken the opportunity with both hands, and I guess the sky's the limit now.
Most certainly. Let's talk about the next test that lies ahead for the Springboks. It will be on the 6th of July at Loftus. A happy stomping ground for the Springboks, I would say. They have a lot of confidence heading to that venue, but they're taking on a team that they last played at the 2023 Rugby World Cup, which is Ireland. And they were actually beaten with a 13 to 8 point scoreline in that particular encounter. Heading into this game, we saw that Rassie has named his squad of 39 players. He's also got 14 supporting players as well. Are you happy with that squad? And also we saw a man that South Africans love, which is Siyamthanda Khulisi. Are you happy?
Very happy with the team, and I think this match against Ireland is very personal. Particularly when it comes to the two camps. There's a bit of spice already with the Irish media sparking, unnecessary, verbal spats. They're talking about an interview that Eben Etzebeth did on a podcast in Europe, talking about how Ireland were already celebrating, telling the Springboks that they'll meet them in the final before they played the All Blacks.
That's cheeky.
And Eben thought that the Irish were a bit too cocky because they still had to play the All Blacks.
And we know what the All Blacks did.
We know what the All Blacks did, and they ended up in the... So now it's become a thing because we've never beaten Ireland in the past 4 years. And
that's an interesting stat.
It's a very interesting stat. We haven't beaten them in 4 years. Leading up into the World Cup, Ireland were world number 1. And the world number 1 beat the world champions in there. So who's really number 1? So these are some of the questions that are being posed ahead of this mouth-watering encounter that's going to be happening at Loftus. And I think there's a lot to prove from a player personal point of view. I think when Rassie took over back in 2018, I think the primary focus was that we always had a hoodoo over our head against the All Blacks. And the biggest thing was to beat the All Blacks in New Zealand, which we did. So we shook that monkey off our back. And I think now we have a new monkey on our back, which is the Irish one. And I think there's a bit of spice in there. And heading into this encounter, it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be very physical. I don't see a lot of debutants being given the responsibility to take up. I think it's a battle for the all heads. There's scores that need to be settled, and I'm happy. And Rassie put it out plain blank and said, Siya Kolisi is his skipper. He's going to captain the side.
I love that.
He's not overweight.
We saw those rumors from Racing 92 there in France saying that he's not the one anymore.
Yeah, they said he had one too many croissants and too much wine and cheese. We don't know. But Rassie says if he's fit and ready, he will captain the team. And I think, if you watch Chasing the Sun, you saw there was a time when he himself, Siya Kolisi, was being put into check to say, Siya Kolisi is not bigger than the Springboks. So everybody understands the challenge at hand. But for me, I think the biggest excitement for me is to see how the new coaching staff is going to add a little bit of razzle-dazzle to our backline. I know Tony Brown is a former All Blacks fly half, also former coach at the Highlanders, highly rated as a backline specialist and a skills coach, highly sought after. I think the All Blacks also wanted him to be in his, but Rassie won that race to get Tony Brown into the mix. So it will be very interesting with the amount of talented youngsters we do have. Everybody has always spoken about how South Africa plays this 10-man rugby, one-dimensional, and we've got the forwards, we've got the physicality. What do we do with the ball? And I think we've got a great opportunity now with Tony Brown to see what we can do with these X-factor players that we have in our backline.
Most certainly. I look forward to that test that will be taking place on the 6th of July at Loftus. It will be the Springboks taking on Wales. But a team that we spoke about last week, a team that many South Africans were a little bit concerned about heading into Monaco, is the Blitzboks. And the big talking point was, can the Blitzboks actually book their place at the Paris Olympic Games? You called it, you were quite positive. You said that they've got this and they were able to deliver. Talking about the Monaco scene and the pressure heading into Monaco for the Blitzboks, what did they do right? Because they were able to beat Great Britain in that final, and many people must have been so nervous because, I mean, you can't have the Paris Olympic Games without the Blitzboks being there? That would be a little bit awkward.
I think the old adage says a wounded South African rugby team is a dangerous one.
Hey, I like that one.
And they proved just that. I mean, it was their final opportunity. They squandered 3 opportunities to make it to the Olympics. That was their last shot. It was all or nothing. They were flying below the radar. They were not favorites by any stretch of their imagination, and they made sure that they've booked their place into the Olympics. They've got a tough draw because of their ranking. They're in a group with New Zealand and Ireland. So first things first, we need to exit our group. And if we can exit our group, then I think things will look very rosy. And I think the mindset needs to be that every game is a knockout game going forward.
Just like it was in Monaco.
Just exactly as that. And I think that's the mindset that they need to take. I remember when the Springboks had to play New Zealand in 2019 in our group phases, and we lost our first match. And after that match, every match was literally a knockout match, and we won every single match right up until the final. And I think that's the same approach we need to take. But every other group in the Olympics is quite dangerous. I mean, you've seen there's Fiji, there's Kenya, there's all these other teams who've been mesmerizing on the HSBC Sevens tour. So there's no easy group, but I just think if the guys just knuckle down and do the basics right. I mean, I think the biggest thing from their season, more than anything, was not that they don't have the talent. It was just a case of inconsistency and
100%.
just putting those winning games together and just making sure you keep grinding to the next one right up until the end. So hopefully they can put their hands up and put on a wonderful display in France.
Most certainly. The team that we often forget about is the Springbok Women's Sevens team. Yeah. They've also qualified for the Paris Olympic Games. Given what we've seen from them and also looking broadly at women's rugby in South Africa, are you quite happy with what we're seeing? Because initially, a few years ago, it was almost like a slow start, like slowly but surely building momentum, getting the ladies to compete at the highest level so that they can get used to the pressure. But they will also be heading to Paris. What are you expecting from the ladies?
Yeah, I've just seen such an incredible improvement, if I can call it that. I think Rainfront Dazel, former Sevens player and now coach of the women's team, has done such an incredible job, to a point where we've even got ladies who used to play other professional codes like netball moving over to the Sevens team setup. And it just shows you that if it's that attractive and that fun in that environment, it means that they will get better. They've been registering some very historical wins throughout the season, and now they've made another one by making sure that they've booked their place to the Olympics. And more than anything, I'd be happy if they just get to the knockout stages. Anything beyond that, will be a cherry on top. I think the work that the Blue Bulls Daisies are doing over in Pretoria is also fantastic. The first franchise to give women, full-time contracts, it has just changed the game completely, because now if they're doing that for a living and they're getting paid for it,
changes the game.
It just elevates their professionalism. So if other provinces can follow suit, the only thing that's left is just that the professional league will just get better. So currently, we don't have that many full-time professional ladies, and to be able to put together a team that can compete on a global stage at that level is commendable. And hopefully, things can, speed up in the sense of getting women, the professional spots when it comes to the game of rugby.
Most certainly. We're wishing the Blitzboks as well as the Springbok Women's Sevens team all the best out in Paris as they take part in the Olympic Games. But you spoke about the Bulls there.
Yeah.
You were talking about the Bulls Daisies. I heard the Bulls, right? And we have to talk about the Bulls.
Yeah.
That's a team that many South Africans thought that, it's the perfect Saturday. The Springboks are going to beat Wales at Twickenham at 3 o'clock. And then at 6 o'clock, South Africa is going to do it again.
Yeah.
This time beating the Glasgow Warriors, courtesy of the Bulls.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that was not the case.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about what the Glasgow Warriors did right. Because in the semi-finals, they beat Munster, who were the defending champions. And South Africans still believed that the Bulls playing at Loftus still gives us the upper hand. Your analysis of where it went wrong for the Bulls?
I think, the more and more I watch that match, I didn't watch it only once. I actually tried to watch it.
You had to relive the trauma.
I had to relive the trauma. The more I realized how well coached the Glasgow Warriors are. The Bulls didn't do too much wrong. I think the Glasgow Warriors just wanted it a little bit more. And in that sense also, I think we need to acknowledge the kind of intellectual property that South Africa is sending out to the world, because the Glasgow Warriors are coached by Franco Smith, a South African from the Free State, and you can tell by the type of rugby that they play, that free-flowing type of rugby, but they also brought the grit and the tackle fight. And I think more than anything, when it came to the gain line, they were very solid. I think their runners, especially their strike runners out wide, were unbelievable. They were breaking tackles, and from breaking a tackle, you're able to build momentum, and the Bulls had to consistently scramble on defense. And I'm not ashamed to say it now, and I'll probably say it again. I still feel the Bulls haven't found a replacement for Joey Mongalo.
On defense, the former defense coach.
I think ever since he left, I think the first URC that South Africa was part of, the Bulls was the stingiest defense in the entire tournament. And they scored a lot of tries from turnover. And yes, they've got the flashiest attack because in terms of stats and the number of tries that they're conceding, scoring, but in terms of the tries that they're leaking and the types of tries that they're leaking, they still haven't tightened up that area. But nonetheless, I think the Bulls gave it everything they have. There were a few line breaks, a few squandered opportunities, but nothing clear cut. Nothing to say that the Bulls deserved it more than Glasgow. And I think Glasgow on the day pitched up. They were a better team. I think towards the 60th minute, I thought the travel factor was going to kick in. I thought fatigue was going to kick in. I thought altitude was going to kick in.
And the crowd. I thought the crowd will actually
but it didn't.
be that
it just seemed that they kicked on from there. So just kudos to Glasgow Warriors, but also hats off to Franco Smith for flying the South African flag high. As much as, Glasgow are a Scottish team, it was two South African coaches in the URC final, and that's something to be proud of.
Most certainly. The one thing that Jake White mentioned in the press conference after the game is the fact that a lot of the Glasgow Warriors players are actually international rugby players, and he spoke about how his team is still a very young team who let go of an opportunity to win a trophy. What does Jake White do differently heading into the next season of the URC? Because they've now played in two finals, but they haven't won a URC title. What does he do differently?
Nothing at all. I think
more of the same, you say?
More of the same. I think the Bulls are developing, and we touched it on earlier. You can't coach experience, and some of the lowest of the lows are some of the best lessons that one can learn.
That pain that one carries.
Pain, and I think more than anything, these young players will learn from that. And when the success comes, and I think it will start kicking on from next season, when the success comes and they dominate for about 10 to 15 years, people will forget, where it all started, and it was the same for the Crusaders, who dominated Super Rugby for all those years, before Scott Robinson there, before Scott Robinson joined the Crusaders as a player, him and Todd Blackadder and all these guys who went on to become All Blacks in the late 90s and early 2000s. The Crusaders were getting a thumping left, right, and center, and they changed that culture, and they started just winning back-to-back, Super Rugby titles. So it always has to start somewhere. You can't start off by winning, and the fact that the Bulls are able to have a young group that they can keep for a very long time. Most of them have committed to the club. It just tells you that the future of this club is bright. They ended up in the final, and I think next year they have enough talent base to compete on the European circuit, both on the Champions Cup and of course the URC.
Most certainly. You spoke about talent, you spoke about development. That actually reminds me of a rugby tournament that's actually taking place in South Africa.
Yes.
During this week, which is Craven week,
Yeah.
which is a massive rugby tournament, especially if you're under 18 and you are looking to capture the attention of the right people that can possibly give you a professional contract, or you can join one of the rugby unions. Talk to me about the importance of Craven week. Often we hear about it when we hear news updates. We don't really focus on it too much, but we forget that players like Samthanda Kolisi actually played at Craven Week. How important is this tournament for the development of South African rugby?
Unbelievably important. And it starts at under 13 level, because you have under 13 Craven Week. From there you have the under 16 Grand Homo Week, and then you have the under 18 Craven Week. And I think when Rassie Rasmus was still director of rugby, he put in systems in place where you start tracking players from the age of 13 in the system to find out where they go, so that they end up in the Springbok setup, you know, so that they don't get lost to the system. So it's almost like you have like a tracking system.
You're constantly monitoring.
You're constantly monitored, and they go to camps, they get told where they need to improve. So even if you come from a small farm in the Free State or somewhere in Mpumalanga, you are being tracked. And if you in an area where perhaps you don't have a high school or whatever, then they'll find a blue chip school that can take you in to make sure that you're on the system, that we don't lose players in between the cracks. Then the ones that are lost in between the cracks, then there's varsity rugby, because you get late bloomers. You know, and then they can go on to go play professional rugby. So in the bigger scheme, I was just like trying to paint this picture for you to show you that, you know, we can't isolate it to the under 18 Craven Week. There's an entire ecosystem that works in terms of development, and one of them is the under 18 Craven Week that's happening right now, extremely important. And particularly the fact that you know, most of the coaches are also included in the SA rugby structures in terms of coaching seminars, so that we have a common vision in terms of playing identity as a country. And I've been seeing some of you know, some of the scrummaging that's been happening at this year's Craven Week. Unbelievable. Nothing like when we were at school, you know, and some
almost
of the
professional standard.
Almost professional standard. I mean, some of the backline moves, some of these number 10s, unbelievable. Is it Yakim Ahmed from Western Province, Wynberg Boys High? Yeah, unbelievable talent at number 10. You know, you have another one, Felix from the Cheetahs. He's also a magician. They call him Shake and Bake.
Hey.
And he's just had this, you know, captivating audiences with his no-look passes and you know, sidestepping through oppositions. And then you have boys who are just unbelievable in the line-out, the work that they do, the work rate off the ball. You know, these little things that not a normal consumer might be looking out for. Just unbelievable, the level of fitness, the pace that these games are being played at. And you know, if you haven't watched any of the games, I suggest you do. I think today is the second last day. The last day will be on Saturday. So you can catch the final day on Saturday. But just if you're in and around the Krugersdorp area, you can just go to Monument Hoërskool and just go sit there in the stands and watch the future of rugby, you know,
greatness in the making,
unfold before your very eyes. But I've been very, very impressed with the level of skill, the level of professionalism, and the fact that they are emphasizing, you know, the cleanness of the game. There's been a lot of yellow cards and red cards that have been happening, because they want the boys to learn to tackle low, no headshots, no unnecessary foul play, and so forth. So it's been a clean week of good rugby.
Absolutely fantastic. Khotoselo, my brother, yet again, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, we appreciate your rugby knowledge.
Thank you, my brother.
To you at home, I would love to get your thoughts. We spoke about the Springboks heading to Loftus for their next encounter. What are you expecting at the Loftus Stadium between the Springboks and the Irish? And also talking about the Blitzboks. How proud are you of the fact that they have now officially qualified for the Paris Olympic Games. And if you will be around the area in Krugersdorp where you will be watching some Craven Week rugby, let me know which players will you be watching out for. I'd love for you to join the conversation in the comment section. And yet again, thank you so much for watching Rugga United.
I saw a cherry and it was red.